Doosan unveils 2 new wheel loaders. Yanmar unveils 3 new mini excavators. And JCB takes another giant step on the road to zero emissions. All that and more in the weekend wrap. Now, speaking of removing fallen bridges from the highway. You might remember this time last week we actually brought you exclusive footage of a test blast that fell part of a flyover on the I-35 in Austin, Texas. At the time we said that the remainder of the flyover was scheduled to be filled this weekend. Well, as that film just proved, Daikon Explosive Demolition was good to its word. Not sure if you heard it, but the final instruction given just before the bridge fell was to light it up, Archer. Archer is actually a 6-year-old leukemia survivor who was given the chance to hit the plunger that ultimately brought down the bridge. So well done, Archer, and perhaps even more so, well done to Daikon. So a weird thing happened yesterday. News reached us that JCB had made another step along the road to hydrogen power. Now, we'd already covered the fact that the company had developed a hydrogen-fueled excavator, in prototype form at least, so the fact that the British manufacturer was still dabbling with hydrogen really came as no great surprise. What marked this as weird, however, was that A, we first heard about it in the Telegraph newspaper, that B, it then appeared in the car sector magazine, Autocar, and then C, that the latest development is apparently aimed at more than just the construction equipment sector. If you look in the description for today's show, you will see a link to the Autocar article, but in essence it says JCB's hydrogen engine is naturally aimed at its own off-highway applications. But after successful initial trials in excavators, the company's engineers believe they have a technology that can be successfully applied in a much wider range of vehicles. JCB's chairman, Lord Bamford, set up a specialist hydrogen engine research team at the company's R&D centre last year after growing increasingly concerned about the impending loss of piston engine expertise. Perhaps most telling of all in the story is a quote from Lord Bamford, who says, "We're not arguing for diesel anymore. That horse has bolted. Zero carbon emissions must be the target, but we don't believe that batteries and fuel cells are the only answer." Now, this is a subject that we'll be revisiting in a special live show, and I'll tell you more about that in just a second. But imagine that JCB, a name synonymous with construction equipment, could yet find itself at the very forefront of hydrogen-powered vehicle development. Could JCB be the next Tesla? Personally, I'd love to see it. I'm scheduled to visit the JCB World Headquarters in just over a week's time. Hopefully, I can tell you a little bit more after that. So, could Doosan be the Tesla of the construction equipment world? Could Volvo or Liebherr or JCB or Komatsu? Could XCMG from China do to the plant world what Elon Musk has done to the car market? Well, those were just a few of the questions actually raised in last night's show. Where are the disruptors, in which myself and my co-conspirator Peter Haddock were joined by 2 of the sharpest minds in the construction equipment sector, Alan Berg and Carl Gustaf Goranson. Among the subjects covered in the show was the electrification of construction equipment, the likely impact of hydrogen fuel, remote controls and autonomous machines, and I'm pretty sure that someone mentioned worker exoskeletons with digger attachments too. The show really was as insightful as it was enjoyable. It was absolutely great to be involved in that one. So if you love diggers, or if you like an early insight into the future predicted by 2 key industry experts, and I'd urge you to give this one a watch. I'll add a link to that show in the description for this show down below. Now, if you didn't know it already, hydrogen-powered construction and demolition equipment is headed your way at a rate of knots. We brought you the news that JCB now has an engine division focused specifically upon hydrogen engines for construction equipment and for other unspecified vehicles. Who knows what that means? And now comes the news that Volvo has opened the first hydrogen fuel cell test lab. The lab has been created as part of Volvo's stated ambition to be fossil fuel free. Try saying that after a few pints. Fossil fuel free by 2040. Let's take a look.
So let's talk a little bit about hydrogen. And I'm sure that many of you have noticed and heard of the focus on hydrogen in Europe and most of the world, actually. And hydrogen has a lot of opportunities, that's clear. One is, of course, that the actual emissions in the machine when you use a hydrogen fuel cell is zero. However, what's very important is how the hydrogen is produced. Today, most hydrogen available is actually produced using fossil fuels. And that means that when you produce a hydrogen, you actually have CO2 emissions in that process. So from a well-to-wheel approach, that's really not a good solution. So critical is that the hydrogen is produced using green energy or energy from renewable power sources like wind and solar. So that's really, really key. And I think a lot of focus is going on in that area. Other challenging areas is still also logistics or infrastructure on how the hydrogen actually will be distributed and how it will be available in the marketplace. So many opportunities, but still many things to work on as well.
I think it's doubtful that I'll be around in 2040 to report on the day that Volvo becomes truly fossil fuel free. But hats off to them for this significant investment. Now, just to prove that, contrary to popular opinion, these shows are not thrown together at the last minute, I am now about to seamlessly combine two items. Our Round the World in a Dozen Hats today calls it upon Korea, courtesy of this very smart model that I'm wearing here, from the equally smart people over at Doosan. And speaking of Doosan, see what I did there? The rollout of the company's award-winning DL7 wheel loader range is continuing apace. You might recall that we brought you details of the launch of the first 7 DL7 models back at the end of last year. Well, those 7 models have now been joined by a further 2, the DL220-7 and the DL250-7. The standard bucket capacities on the DL220-7 and 250-7 are 2.3 and 2.5 cubic meters respectively. Both machines are powered by a Stage 5 compliant diesel engine. The DL220-7 and 250-7 are backed by a standard 3-year or 5,000-hour warranty. You can find out more about these new machines over at diggersanddozers.com. Now, if you were watching yesterday, you will know that I was scheduled to take part in a virtual machine launch with those fine folks over at Yanmar. And yesterday afternoon, the manufacturer launched not 1, not 2, but 3 new additions to its mini excavator lineup. Let's take a look. The new models are the SV15 VT, the SV17 VT, and the SV19 VT, and the VT stands for variable track. All three are powered by Stage 5 compliant diesel engines, and they each compete in the 1.5 to 2 ton operating weight class. You can find out a lot more details over at diggersandozers.com, and I will post a link to the full length, I think it's nearly 10 minutes actually, launch video from Yanmar themselves when I put out the extended show notes a bit later on.
If you enjoyed this show, please consider supporting us. Go to buymeacoffee.com/demolition news.